The views expressed in this podcast are those of the respective participants and do not represent the official position of the U.S. Army, North Carolina National Guard, or the federal state government. While I was deployed, I assisted several soldiers with their immigration process, and they actually became U.S. citizens during a deployment and were naturalized at a U.S. embassy by the ambassador. And that's a pretty awesome experience as an attorney to see these soldiers who have signed up to serve this country and then become citizens of this country because of that service. I know we've all got stories like that.
Hello and welcome to All Things Judicial, a podcast of the North Carolina Judicial Branch. This is the first episode of a two-part series in recognition and appreciation of Veterans Day and the United States Armed Forces. North Carolina Army National Guard Captain and Attorney Tom Murray is joined by two attorneys with the North Carolina Army National Guard, Captain Katie Reynolds and Lieutenant J.T. Kinane. This is an enlightening discussion about legal services available to military personnel that judges, prosecutors, and court staff may find useful as they encounter service members in the North Carolina court system. Stay with us as we keep all things judicial.
My name's Tom Murray, and I am a captain in the North Carolina Army National Guard. And with me today, I have Captain Katie Reynolds and Lieutenant J.T. Kinane. We are going to discuss what the North Carolina National Guard Legal Assistance Program is all about and assist judges, prosecutors, and court staff on what they need to know about the Service Members Civil Relief Act and the North Carolina Service Members Civil Relief Act. So I'll turn to Captain Reynolds. Please, would you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hello, I'm Captain Katie Reynolds. I'm a captain in the North Carolina Army National Guard, graduate of UNC Law. I joined the National Guard in 2016 and have enjoyed every minute of it since joining. Most recently, I was serving in the role of Chief of Legal Assistance. And so North Carolina National Guard is one of only two states, the other state being Arkansas, that has a full-time legal assistance program. And we'll get into a little bit about what that program does. But I just wanted to point out North Carolina is pretty unique in the services that we offer compared to the other states and their abilities.
Lieutenant Kinane, could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Hello, my name is J.T. Kinane. I am the current Chief of Legal Assistance for the North Carolina National Guard. I joined the National Guard in 2020. After a break in service, I had previously served in the Marine Corps, both in active duty and reserve. I attended law school in the evening program at North Carolina Central University, and I saw that as an opportunity to finish out my time serving the country and the state, and like Captain Reynolds, I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Excellent. Well, I served as Chief of Legal Assistance while Captain Reynolds was deployed to the Middle East, and I did that from 2018 to 2019, about a year and a half. I was in that same role. So you've got three folks who have spent several years working on legal assistance issues. So I think the first thing we want to talk about are who are the clients that are eligible for legal assistance through the North Carolina National Guard. Captain Reynolds?
So the shorthand that we use for eligibility for our program is whether or not somebody has the DoD ID card, the CAC, which is the Common Access Card for a service member, a dependent of a service member, or a retiree. That's our shorthand. So that's not completely accurate in what Army Regulation 27.3 says we can cover. But I think a lot of veterans hope to be eligible for our legal assistance program, and unfortunately they're not, and I'll let Lieutenant Kinane speak to that.
Yeah, so you think of military veterans, they tend to fall into three general categories. You have your service members, and you have your people that have served honorably but did not retire from the military, and then you have your military retirees. And so as Captain Reynolds was explaining, our eligibility is governed by regulation, by Army Regulation 27-3. And as the shorthand, she explained, if you have the ID card, then you're likely to be eligible. But we offer those services to the service members, their dependents, to retirees and their dependents. But unfortunately, because this is overall a readiness program for readiness of service members, we're not able to provide veterans, those that have served but not currently serving or retired from military service. We're not able to offer to them. We do offer to not just service members of the North Carolina National Guard. We offer to the Army and to the other services as well. In fact, we do catch some spillover from the more populous bases that we have in North Carolina, like Fort Bragg down in Fayetteville, or Seymour Johnson over in Goldsboro, or Camp Lejeune or in Jacksonville.
So the shorthand is, if the Department of Defense issued you an identification card, chances are you would be eligible for legal assistance to the North Carolina National Guard. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, so long as that identification card is still valid, and I would distinguish that from a Veterans Administration identification
That's
card.
exactly what I was trying to get at, JT, is the Veterans Administration also issues cards to veterans that might not mean you are eligible for legal assistance
That's
services.
correct. Generally speaking, and I don't feel qualified to speak on the VA or their policies, but veterans with service-connected disabilities generally receive an ID card, and they are sometimes eligible to access military installations, to go to the beach or to use the stores on base. But they would be precluded from seeking legal assistance under this program.
So with a focus on readiness, which is the tagline for the North Carolina National Guard, always ready. So what does the North Carolina National Guard Legal Assistance Program do to help soldiers and their families stay ready so they can help their fellow citizens in our country and our state?
So under Army Regulation 27-3, that's really our bread and butter. Is we do quite a bit of family law, and so we can prepare separation and property settlement agreements for our soldiers. We can do estate planning, landlord-tenant law, consumer transactions like identity theft and cancellation of indebtedness. We do a good bit of immigration and naturalization, military administrative matters like GOMAR, which is a General Officer Memorandum of Reprimand. Will help soldiers with rebuttals.
That's a nasty letter from a general because of some sort of misconduct potentially for the audience. So that's what a GOMAR stands for. Alleged misconduct, as my friend who's a defense attorney on the side says.
Right. FLIPL rebuttals, that's the financial liability investigation of property loss. So if you lose, damage, or destroy government property, we absolutely do try to charge you for that. And the legal assistance program is here to help you rebut that.
We are going to get that property back.
One way or another.
Or the money.
Or the money.
And we can also help with referred OERs, NCOERs.
That's an officer evaluation report and non-commissioned officer evaluation report. So if you were in your rating chain, somebody says something you don't agree with, you can rebut that, and the legal assistance program will assist with that.
I think an easy way to think about that is to compare it to, in the corporate world, people get performance evaluations, right? And so if your manager rates you in a way that you think that might be unfairly reflective of your actual performance, there's an opportunity to not only rebut that on your own, but you can seek legal assistance from our office for the Army's version of it to make that rebuttal.
And then last but not least, we do a tax center each year where we prepare federal and state income tax returns for all of our eligible clients and file them totally free.
And we all have been dunked on with taxes because it is the churn of legal assistance at the North Carolina National Guard during tax season, and it's amazing how busy you get during that. So that's a huge service. I know we've all got stories on how we've done estate plans and worked on wills and things like that, but I think when Captain Reynolds mentioned immigration, while I was deployed, I assisted several soldiers with their immigration process, and they actually became U.S. citizens during a deployment and were naturalized at a U.S. embassy by the ambassador. And that's a pretty awesome experience as an attorney to see these soldiers who have signed up to serve this country and then become citizens of this country because of that service. And I know we've all got stories like that. So do you have any clients that you would like to describe as part of the services that you've provided, JT?
What I have found is not on the immigration one yet, because I personally have not yet had that experience. Some of the other attorneys in the office have. But coming back to the readiness discussion, what we experience sometimes, and I know that we plan to talk about the Service Members Civil Relief Act here in the episode, you do have soldiers that are ready to deploy, and as they're trying to get their affairs in order before they go, they try to inform their landlord that, hey, I've got to go. I'm going to need to break my lease. And the reply from the landlord basically says, well, hey, look, that's not my problem. Here's what you owe me. And I find it particularly rewarding when you can take that worry away from that soldier. What's going to happen to my credit because I'm leaving? Am I going to have a potential eviction against me out on my record? And the answer to that is no, that they can deploy with that peace of mind. We are sensitive that landlords are businesses and they have investments also, but the greater impact is to the deploying service member, and their compliance with the law is in a way of supporting the mission as well.
Before we transition and talk about the Service Members Civil Relief Act, Katie, do you have any clients or experiences? I think we're going to get into a little bit with the North Carolina version of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, but anything you want to add before we make that transition?
Yeah, I'll add. So it might seem a little odd to say that family law is a readiness issue, but I will say when I was deployed with the 30th Armored Brigade Combat Team, Old Hickory, from 2019 to 2020, I did have a commander approach me and say, can you please help my soldier? He's really distraught. His spouse just sent him a separation of property settlement agreement, and he doesn't know what to do with it. And, he's really worried. And so the commander's trying to focus on his mission overseas, and he's trying to keep his soldiers focused on their mission overseas. And I met with the soldier, and it was, a really crazy kind of, I think they thought he, obviously overseas wasn't going to have representation, and I don't know what they thought they were going to do with it with him gone, but I was able to sit him down and talk to him and come up with a more reasonable counter offer to their offer, and just the peace of mind that we were able to give him just by knowing that he had an actual licensed attorney to speak with about family law matters was such a huge weight off of his shoulders. And so when we're talking about what our scope is and all the things that we do and include it in readiness, it's so that our soldiers can be overseas and focus on their mission, or we can be taking care of it now so that if we do get called to state active duty at a moment's notice, they're not trying to scramble and get these things taken care of.
As Captain Reynolds mentioned earlier, Arkansas and North Carolina have legal assistance programs. And the reason why only states do is because that is at the commander's discretion of whether or not to offer such a program. And in North Carolina, our commander is the adjutant general, and we exist to serve our soldiers because of our adjutant general's discretion, and we appreciate that on behalf of service members who benefit from it.
Our adjutant general has been so supportive of the program over the years, the different adjutants general, and it's just amazing with their support what we can do for our soldiers and airmen.
I think that's great. I think that's part of the wisdom of the JAG program, the Judge Advocate General program, to have lawyers with commanders to help address those issues that impact soldier readiness and ability to carry out the mission. So one of those that the federal government, Congress, has passed many years ago from 1940 was the Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act, also known as the SCRA. Captain Reynolds, would you mind going over the main protections contained in the Service Members Civil Relief Act, SCRA?
I would love to, and I'm going to caveat this with this is the shorthand that we tell soldiers, and of course every situation is different, and whether an individual's situation is covered by the SCRA is determined on a case-by-case basis. But in general, when we're briefing soldiers.
This is not specific legal advice pertaining to your specific situation. Please call a legal assistance attorney. That's a great disclaimer, Katie. Thank you for doing that.
So soldiers, service members have a right to terminate a lease on a residence and a motor vehicle without any early termination penalties under the federal law. They can waive that if it is in a separate document in bold letters, and they're clearly waiving their rights under the SCRA with regard to that. They have protection from foreclosure of storage units without a court order, provisions on a service member's residence for tax purposes, which can also extend to a spouse. But more importantly, I think for this audience would be a stay of civil proceedings and protections against default judgments. So the SCRA applies to any judicial or administrative proceeding commenced in any court or agency in any jurisdiction that is subject to the Act. It provides for a stay of civil proceedings no less than 90 days upon application, and appointment of an attorney to represent a defendant in the military service.
I think that's a great point, that the North Carolina National Guard Legal Assistance Program can be a conduit to any service member in any branch that's deployed, because there is a lawyer associated with most of those deployed units, at least at higher, where we can make that connection and try to find out where that soldier is. And so I think that's an excellent point. There are legal assistance attorneys that are forward and on these bases, especially the major bases around the globe, and we can find those folks.
And maybe for us, and we might have skipped over this in a way, right? It might go without saying for those of us on this side of the wall, right? But it's worth mentioning that all of these services are provided free of charge to the eligible client.
No kidding. And it's a great benefit. I know we try to do calculations every year to estimate the value of services that we provide, and it's a significant number every year for the North Carolina National Guard Legal Assistance Program, which is one of the reasons why it's an award-winning program. There is a North Carolina version. I think one of the main differences of the North Carolina Service Members Civil Relief Act is that there's a focus on state active duty. So first, I'll open it up to either JT or Captain Reynolds. How would you describe state active duty?
State active duty would be any time that the members of the North Carolina National Guard are called into service by the governor of the state of North Carolina. So there have been riots in North Carolina. There have been hurricanes that hit North Carolina, and there's not a need for the federal government to say, we're not going to give you funding, or we are going to give you funding, that the governor can do that on his own authority.
It's that state first homeland type mission. And I know I've had experience working during civil unrest and some experience with hurricane operations. I also had a chance to go to the presidential inauguration. Now, that wasn't state active duty. That was kind of a hybrid federal mission, but every state responded. And so there is a wide array of missions that are domestic in nature that North Carolina National Guard soldiers get called to, ranging from hurricanes, weather-related, ice storms, civil unrest, and as well as the COVID-19 response. We had a lot of food delivery operations. Not all of that is state active duty, but those are the types of missions that you can see guardsmen performing. And I know that's probably impacted every community across our state. How often would you say are service members of the North Carolina National Guard mobilized on state active duty?
2 weeks ago for Hurricane Ian.
I say it's more frequent than you would see on TV, right? Because whenever we're preparing for a large hurricane or preparing for something like that, we're calling up soldiers all over the state who are going to the armories on standby, getting ready, and then they might be released the next day or 3 or 5 days later. Or if it is a serious incident, then they're on state active duty for quite a while.
Yep, I know I've gotten that call where it's like, where are you? How fast can you get here? Can you get here in 1 day? Can you get here in 2 days? Can you get here in 3 days? And it's really a call to ask where you are, what you've got going on. There's a mission that we've got, and are you available? And sometimes it's more urgent, and you get the call like, I need you to go now, or there's a little more time to plan. And so I think we've all experienced that call, and I know if there are people who have served in the North Carolina National Guard, you've gotten that call from a readiness non-commissioned officer. So I think that's one of the points of state active duty. It can be involuntary as well. You could be told to show up at an armory and report in 24 to 48 hours. Captain Reynolds, I think part of the reason why we started working on the changes to the North Carolina Service Members Civil Relief Act was due to one of the state active duty events that took soldiers out of the state of North Carolina and into Puerto Rico. So, Captain Reynolds, could you tell the story on what provided the motivation for you to start looking at potentially changing the law and including state active duty as part of the protections under North Carolina law?
Part of the legal assistance program is preventive law. And so one thing that we do in the program is we are tracking trends and issues that our soldiers and airmen are seeing as they are mobilizing. And so when a big hurricane hit Puerto Rico a number of years ago, the North Carolina National Guard called up a good large number of soldiers on very short notice, and these soldiers had to leave their whole lives. So you're talking about their wives, their husbands, their children, their parents, their job, their homes. They're trying to make emergency arrangements for pets, for vehicles. Who's going to pay their bills?
I think that was more than a battalion, right? It was bigger than a battalion that went there. Is that correct?
I think so, yeah. And I think it was maybe just 1 or 2 days notice. It was very short. Don't quote me on that. But I remember being very short, and we were getting a large influx of calls from soldiers saying, I don't know what to do. So there's a lot of, for example, assistance programs who will help with pets when you're going on active duty and that sort of thing. Nothing really for state active duty, and who's going to watch pets and arranging for that, or who's going to watch children for single parents. We do have family care plans, but getting your children to that location, maybe in another state on that short notice, is a struggle for our soldiers. So we went, though. Our soldiers went, and they went over to Puerto Rico with no electricity, no running water. They were staying in a building whose roof had half blown off. And so no showers, nothing like that. I think that there was a couple satellite phones that the command team had, and that's how they were reaching home. And then as services were restored, they had that access back. But it was quite a while that they were without just basic services like that. And so when we did start getting phone calls, it was all over the place. And so one of the big things was under the federal SCRA, I believe, if you're mobilized on active duty and you are enrolled in a university or college, you have certain protections about paying, how to get out of class and paying your student loans and whether or not you'll be charged. But if you go on state active duty, and I think our soldiers were gone for 60 days or more, right? That's a lot of schooling to miss. There were zero protections at the time. And so that was something my boss, the chief of legal assistance at the time, Major Rob Hogarth, now retired, worked on to say that, and there is legislation, it's not in the NCSCRA, but there is legislation that North Carolina state colleges and universities, there's provisions to protect our service members who are enrolled in school. So that was one thing that came out of it. Another thing that came out was just the need for the state SCRA to protect our soldiers, because so many issues, not being able to pay bills because they didn't have anybody at home to pay their rent, or they're getting evicted, that sort of thing. So that was when we came back together and started thinking about how we could help our North Carolina National Guard service members.
And so a lot of the protections that were described earlier under the federal Service Members Civil Relief Act did not extend to these soldiers serving on state active duty. And so, Lieutenant Kinane, what is unique to North Carolina in the Service Members Civil Relief Act that was passed in 2019?
Well, there are a few things. So the North Carolina Civil Service Relief Act incorporates the federal SCRA into state law. So that's one thing that you get. You don't lose anything.
So it's an express incorporation.
Yes, sir. And then, as stated before, it extends to members of the National Guard, but also to members of other states' National Guard that might be supporting North Carolina.
So Captain Reynolds mentioned an acronym earlier, EMAC. That's that Emergency Management Assistance Compact that each state has, so that if there's a problem in South Carolina, they can call North Carolina and request specific assets that our National Guard might have that they don't have, and vice versa. We can call South Carolina. And that's happened. That happens a lot. We've had soldiers in many states serving other states' governors at the governor's request. And I think that's a testament to the federal-state partnership that is the National Guard across our country. So what other protections for soldiers serving on state active duty are included in the North Carolina Service Members Civil Relief Act?
So one of the things about the North Carolina SCRA that makes it a robust piece of legislation is that it has a no waiver provision for its protections. So under the federal SCRA, a service member might waive their rights to the protections from being able to break a lease, whereas under the North Carolina statute, you cannot waive that, right? So that is always available to that tenant. Separate from early termination, if their lease were to expire while they are deployed, the lease is to continue under the same terms as if it had been renewed until the service member's return.
And that's in response to a specific issue that we saw in that Hurricane Maria mission, where during that 60-day service members of the North Carolina National Guard had their leases expire, and their stuff was put in storage, and they came back to having no apartment and not knowing where their stuff was. Does that sound right, Captain Reynolds? Does that sound familiar?
It does, yeah. I did have one client who his lease was going to expire in about 30 days, and so he had just started packing and didn't have a way to hurry up and get it in storage. And so it was a lot of legal assistance time trying to talk to that apartment complex, and they're saying, well, if they hold over, then the rent's going to double and that sort of thing. So, yeah, not only putting it in storage and paying those fees, but trying to work out other things as well, yeah.
And that no waiver provision supersedes any other agreement that might be in there that might otherwise limit those protections. I think the last one that I would mention, though, is that the North Carolina SCRA has teeth, right? That a knowing violation of it is unfair deceptive trade practice under Chapter 75.
So, Captain Reynolds, service in the Guard and the Reserves is difficult. It can put stresses on families, it can put stresses on soldiers, and there's a huge burden on the service member and on the employer, as well as service members who are in school, and service members who rent houses on their landlords. And so, could you talk about some other things that we need to know about that might be helpful for the judicial community on what it's like, or things that they need to know about service in the North Carolina National Guard?
I think one of the big issues we hear a lot is pay. And so it's not federal pay, and it doesn't start right away like you would think. It's pay from the state, like you're starting a new job, and so the soldiers have to wait, or airmen, for the next pay cycle, and that could be 2 weeks away. So they leave their employment, they're not getting paid there, and there could be a big chunk of time before they see their state active duty paycheck. And it's nothing anybody's done wrong. That's just the way pay cycles work. And so if you think somebody is just in North Carolina, at an armory chilling on state active duty, and there's no reason they can't pay their bills, there might be a really good reason why they haven't gotten a paycheck in a month.
I think it's a great point. And so when you're on state active duty, you're a state employee. And I think one of the other interesting things is that you're eligible for workers' compensation for any injuries that occur while on state active duty, whereas if you were on federal service, it would be a line of duty, and that could trigger some disability payment that you could get as a disabled veteran, but that doesn't apply in a state active duty situation. You're a state employee and you're under the workers' compensation laws of North Carolina. So I think the last thing that I would like to cover is the aspect of of kind of one of these federal aspects, even in the North Carolina National Guard, where all judge advocates are able to notarize documents and prepare testamentary documents without having to follow specific forms under state law. So I know I've prepared wills for people way out of state, everywhere except Louisiana, because that's a civil law, so they don't let us practice in.
I believe Puerto Rico's out too.
And that's right. That's right. So, but I have drafted wills. As a matter of fact, I've drafted a will this year for a couple who lived in South Carolina during a drill weekend. And so I'm not licensed in the state of South Carolina, but we can draft estate documents for out-of-state residents. So one of the other aspects is that notary aspect. So, Captain Reynolds, could you describe what a Title X notary is and how it might look odd or look a little different for maybe our clerks of superior court or on other documents? And so could you describe what that means, a Title X notary stamp?
So that is shorthand for 10 U.S. Code 1044 Alpha, not subparagraph Alpha, but 1044 Alpha. And that allows judge advocates, civilian attorneys serving as legal assistance attorneys, and civilian paralegals serving in a military legal assistance office who are supervised to act as a notary. And the signature of any such person acting as a notary with the title of that office is evidence that the signature is genuine and the person holds the designated title. So that's big. And the big part of that is no stamp is required. It says so right in the federal statute, no stamp required. We actually have stamps made because it gets questioned so much and it's been rejected for not being stamped, which is frustrating, but I get it. You don't want to accept a document that isn't properly notarized, but that's the main thing. And also to touch on a point that you made under 10 U.S. Code 1044, legal assistance attorneys are allowed to practice in any state, even though we are only licensed in one state. It's not something that we do a whole lot because that is trouble, but that is why that's how we're allowed to do that, draft wills for people who are residents of other states, that sort of thing.
Captain Reynolds, as we're wrapping up, I'd like to ask a kind of a wrap-up question. What's the thing you enjoy the most about serving in the North Carolina National Guard as a judge advocate and helping soldiers in the legal assistance program?
I really enjoy the wide variety of law that I get to practice by being in the North Carolina National Guard. So Monday through Friday in the legal assistance program, you heard the scope that we do, and I don't think a whole lot of people have that kind of scope that they're able to practice on a daily basis. And then on the weekends when I drill, I was trial counsel for a long time, and so that was doing Article 15 non-judicial punishments. That's doing administrative separations for soldiers who committed misconduct, such as testing positive for drugs in the military or some kind of civilian misconduct with a military nexus, that sort of thing. And now I'm currently the national security law attorney, which used to be operational law, and so that's talking about law of war and doing trainings with the soldiers and that sort of thing. So I don't know any other job in the legal field that has such a wide variety of topics that you can go over and you get to practice so often.
Completely agree with that. Lieutenant Kinane, what's the most rewarding experience that you've had, or what's the best part about what you get to do for soldiers in the North Carolina National Guard?
Well, I'm going to repeat something that I think I've said to you before, and I say it quite frequently. You hear a lot of people talk about the law as a miserable profession, and Army lawyers are the happiest lawyers anywhere that I've met. And some of it's along the lines of what Captain Reynolds has talked about. Another aspect is the leadership. There's fulfillment that comes from serving your state and your country here in the National Guard. And then specifically to the legal assistance program, you're helping individual clients. And there's a lot of fulfillment that comes from that. You know, a lot of people, they go to law school thinking about how they would like to make a difference in people's lives, and wind up going to work, say, in big law or the corporate sector, and become disillusioned. And I don't find any of that here. It's a job where I like the practice of law. I like going to work every day, and I like getting results for the clients.
That's great. I know over my years in the North Carolina National Guard, what I've often seen on drill weekend or working full time in the legal assistance program is that, whatever's going on in America or whatever's going on in North Carolina that might be a difficult time, I see the best of America and the best of North Carolina every drill weekend in uniform, serving this state, serving this country. And that's a very motivating force when they're coming to you, asking you for help in their legal matters, their personal legal matters, and we can help them stay ready, stay in the fight, and help their family be prepared. Then you're doing the right thing. And that's probably one of the most rewarding parts of the legal assistance program and serving with the great Americans in the North Carolina National Guard. Captain Reynolds, Lieutenant Kinane, thanks for joining the All Things Judicial podcast. It's an honor to host it and sit with you and discuss such an important and worthwhile effort that the North Carolina National Guard invests in for the benefit of our soldiers.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to anybody. I'd like to say if there's anybody out there listening that's ever doing something and it involves a North Carolina National Guard soldier or airman, please don't hesitate to contact me or Lieutenant Kinane. The Legal Assistance Program phone number is 984-664-6220. And we're happy to talk to you about any questions you have. If you need to locate a soldier or you're looking for just general information, we're happy to talk to you anytime. Thank you.
And I think that Captain Reynolds said it all. I think for me, it's been an honor to be here. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you for having us.
You've been listening to All Things Judicial, a podcast from the North Carolina Judicial Branch. You can find out more about the Judicial Branch by visiting nccourts.gov. Thanks for listening.